Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. It is the time of year, I call it the silly season in the NFL, was we're getting set for the Super Bowl, and we got guys on Radio Row and all kinds of off-season stuff to discuss with the Bengals. It's going to wear me out. It's already worn me out because I'm so sick of talking about the business of sports, but we've got to get to that. We've got a Super Bowl to talk about. We got a lot of college basketball to talk about. We got teams on wild roller coaster rides locally, and much, much more. Of course, my favorite part of the podcast where you can ask me a question on anything. Just hit the Xverse each and every week and hit up the hashtag AskSkinnyAnything. As always, this podcast is presented by Blake the Attorney Maislin. Rick, we got a lot to get to. Let's get to it.
All right, let's do it, Skinny. It is a strange college basketball season, as you mentioned, so we will get to that in a minute. But let's start off with the Super Bowl. I want to do that first and foremost. We'll start here. Do you want to see the Chiefs three-peat?
I'm indifferent. I'm not against it. I admire what they've done because they've done it in different ways. Once with the high-flying offense and now with this solid defense. So I think they're to be admired. I know people people say they hate dynasties, but do they?
I think people do. I genuinely, it's the same exact thing we watched happen with the Patriots, right? Like, they get really good, they win a few, and then everyone hates Pat Mahomes now. They hate the Chiefs. Like, when Pat Mahomes first came onto the scene and the Chiefs first started doing these things, everyone loved Pat Mahomes almost universally. It was like, right. How could you not like this guy? He seems like a decent enough human being.
Now he gets every call.
Yeah, now he gets every call. He's annoying. Everyone hates everyone involved in his family. It's like, so it's just naturally how it goes. I'm not all bought in on the hating the Chiefs and hating Pat Mahomes thing. I think the rivalry with the Bengals, as much as I've felt like maybe the Bengals fans want to make that up, it's in their own heads to some extent. I mean, even just this week on Radio Row, you have Chris Jones saying he feels like the Bengals are the Chiefs' biggest threat in the AFC. So clearly there is something there. I think that rivalry has been fun for Bengals fans, but I don't hate the Chiefs, and I personally want to see greatness. I want to see the three-peat. It's never been done before.
Yeah, and if not, I mean, Philly's on a nice little run themselves. Last year seems like a real blip the way they finished the season. I mean, remember, they were flying high last season and crashed and burned and then crashed and burned in the playoffs. So they're on a little bit of not a dynastic run, but certainly a very good run at the moment. They can cap it with a Super Bowl title. So I think it's a super interesting Super Bowl. I know people are talking about that. I'm not going to watch. You're going to watch. I mean, maybe the numbers are down slightly, but you're going to watch. Why are you not going to watch?
Why do people even say that?
I don't know.
What else are you going to do on Super Bowl Sunday? First of all, everything else is canceled. They purposely take everything else off the air because they don't want to compete with the Super Bowl.
Yeah, my former radio partner, Tom Gamble, who I love to death, and he does say a lot of things just off the cuff, told me this week, Chief, won't watch a minute of it. Gonna watch my Blue Bloods reruns. I know you're not. You're gonna watch.
That's just, yeah, I love when people do that whole bit. Skinny, you mentioned the refs thing. Do you think that the narrative surrounding the officials and the Chiefs might, in some strange, small way, favor the Eagles, if anything? Just because that storyline is so out there, it's so prevalent right now that even from a subconscious perspective, the refs have to be cognizant of it. And, I mean, is there any chance that it makes them slightly more hesitant to call an egregious call against the Chiefs, against the Eagles?
I don't. I'd have to take a deep dive into this crew because you can do that. Obviously, I've not even come close to doing that to see, what do they call a lot, what do they not call much, how much do they call things? Because certain crews do call more than other crews. Some crews call certain calls more than other crews. I mean, as we know. Holding in the NFL it's more subjective. I mean, sometimes there's some blatant holds. You can see those, but sometimes they're more subjective than anything else. And one crew calls it one way, one crew calls it another way. It's like officiating basketball, right? I mean, on one night you say, hey, we need to be super physical. And then all of a sudden the whistle's blowing every 5 seconds. You're like, okay, we got to back off being super physical. As long as it's both ways, you're good with it. But I don't think officials can officiate that way, nor will they.
I don't think anyone would do it consciously either, but I do wonder if, you just hear about it so long. You've heard about it all season if you're a ref. You're obviously aware of it. Does it factor in at all to where you're just slightly more cognizant of, well, I don't want to screw up in favor of the Chiefs? You would think that there might be some of that going on, even if they're not aware of it.
And I would say as a fan base, right, and there's more anti-Chief probably than anything else because of the fact that they've been so good. You're looking for any little thing that looks egregious to be egregious, right?
Yes.
I mean, I do that as a coach. I do that as a coach. There's games where I'm like, that's a terrible call. And I'll go back and watch film and go, it wasn't a great call, but it wasn't it wasn't what I thought it was because I'm wanting the call to go my team's way.
Well, it's also amazing how much worse you feel the officiating is when you're losing.
No question. Absolutely.
Everything drives you crazy when you're losing.
Well, and I will say some of that too is it's a small margin for error, right? I mean, the Chiefs are a hard team to beat. So the margin for error is small, and one call can sway it, whether you thought that was a good call or not.
Do you get into the Tom Brady versus Pat Mahomes as the greatest of all time debate at all?
I don't know. Do you get into Michael Jordan versus LeBron, Wilt versus Kareem, Oscar versus all of them? No.
Yeah, I figured as much, and I'm in the same boat for the most part. I mean, those do nothing for me. I do think on the football side, it's slightly more interesting than like the Jordan LeBron thing, partly because we don't talk about it all the time. It's not something that just comes up nonstop on First Take every single morning during the offseason.
It's very generational, and Brady Brady's end of his career seeped into the start of Mahomes' career too, so they kind of overlapped a little bit.
Well, and in football, it's kind of interesting because pretty much everyone universally agrees at this point Tom Brady is the guy. There's not real I don't think there's a lot of people holding on to like a Joe Montana or John Elway argument at this point. Or Johnny Unitas or whatever. I mean, like everyone's pretty much like Tom Brady has to be designated as the best quarterback of all time, and we're now in a position where Pat Mahomes is getting dangerously close to actually being realistically considered in that same breath. And so while I think it's a dumb argument to have, who really cares? I mean, they're both going to be incredible and two of the best quarterbacks ever. I do think it's a slightly more interesting conversation to have on the football side of things than it is typically when we do these dumb debates.
Yeah, the greatness of Tom Brady not only was the winning and the success, was the longevity. I mean, Pat Mahomes isn't going to reach that longevity.
You wouldn't think. But we also have modern medicine now, man. Who knows what is LeBron doing when we see like a 4-game stretch where he's not moving on defense at all. He looks like he's about 55 years old, that he sits out a game or two. He goes away. We're like, wait, where's LeBron at? Is he watching Bronny play or something in the G League? What happened? Well, there's like weird stories about him. And then he comes back and he's dunking on everyone's heads. It's like, what was that deer antler spray they were doing or the regenerational?
I forgot about that stuff.
Spitting the plasma in their knees or something. Like there's got to be some type of new technology out there that's keeping these guys going longer because like Brady, LeBron, I imagine by 2028, 2029, Mahomes is going to be getting some type of weird treatment.
Yeah, not to go off base here, but LeBron's new technology is called Luka Doncic on his team. That'll add a couple years. That's
pretty good too. I did not have that on our list, although maybe in Ask Skinny Anything we'll get to it because that is something else that's what's taking place in the NBA. All right, give me your pick, Skinny. It's 6:35 p.m. kickoff in New Orleans. Chiefs are a 1.5-point favorite. The total is 48.5. Who do you like, Chiefs or Eagles? Give me a score.
That total seems really, really high with as good as both defenses are. The fact that Philly's going to want to run the ball. I'm going to go a low-scoring game by standards. I'm going to go Eagles 19-17. They end they keep the three-peat from happening. Win a close one in a defensive struggle.
I'm going to go Chiefs 24. Eagles 14.
Yeah, that total seems high, right? I mean, neither one of us really flirted with going anywhere close to that total.
It feels really high, but I also, because of that, because I'm so far away from it, I will not touch the total on a bet. That something seems weird about that, and it feels like I probably am the one who doesn't know what I'm talking about when it comes to that type of situation.
Super Bowls tend to unfurl way different than what you anticipate from a score. Like the ones you think are going to be low scoring turn out to be shootouts or very high scoring by one team, or one team puts a 40 spot on the board or like that Patriots Rams Super Bowl the one year, right? The Zach Taylor's final season as an assistant before he became Bengals head coach. That felt like it was going to be a high scoring game on paper, and neither team could score in that game.
Yeah, everyone's talking about how the Eagles can only run the ball and Jalen Hurts is like more of a game manager now and all this. And it's like my luck, if I bet the under on that game, Jalen Hurts will throw for 400 yards and 3 touchdowns.
I hate to do most of the plays I'm going to make, single game props or whatever are going to lean towards taking that total and probably moving it up a little bit and playing the under with a bunch of mix and match stuff.
That was my next question, actually. Do you have any favorite props for the game?
Yeah, I haven't looked. I honestly have not done a deep dive yet. I know I'll have one that will include a Saquon anytime touchdown, one that's going to include a Kareem Hunt anytime touchdown. But other than that, I have really not.
They had I was looking at FanDuel before we did this podcast, and they had Jalen Hurts as minus 115 for an anytime touchdown, which 115 is about as good odds as you get on anything now.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, too.
That feels like he scores almost every game, and if they get inside the 3-yard line, he's definitely scoring.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. It's good value if you're going to add it to some stuff.
Here's a couple other ones that I like. Tell me what you think about these. Pat Mahomes over 5.5 rushing attempts at minus 102. He's averaging over 8 rushes per Super Bowl.
That's a good one, and he's going to face a really good pass rush that he's going to have to escape from.
That's what I liked about it. Plus, you get the possibility if it does end up a score like I'm talking about, they're up late in the game, you could get a couple kneels.
A couple kneels, those count.
Yep. Both teams to make a 33-plus yard field goal at minus
I like
104.
that. Yeah, I've got 19-17, so I've kind of got a little bit of a field goal fest going on there.
We're in a dome. You've got two big-time kickers. I know Elliott struggled a little bit recently, but he still has made a lot of big kicks in his career. They'll trust him in that moment if they get the opportunity. And then here's another one that I kind of like because I do think the Eagles have a really good defense. I think the Chiefs can be kind of a slow-starting team to some extent. I think the Chiefs are going to win this game, but I would not be surprised to see the Eagles get out to an early, low-scoring game lead. I like Eagles win first half, Chiefs win game at plus 700.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, that's a great value. I mean, lead first half could be 10-9. I mean, whatever.
3-0. I mean,
correct. Yes, I got to see if I can get that. That's a good one.
Plus 700. I'm like,
even though I'm picking the Eagles, that's a good one.
Yeah, I like that one too a lot.
That might be a good hedge for me right there.
There you go. All right. Any other final thoughts on the Super Bowl, Skinny?
No, I mean, like I said, I'm going to watch. The thing I'm a little disappointed in, and I this is the only time I nerd out on stuff like this. You know me on a lot of stuff. I don't go with the trends. I do love the commercials, and I'm a little disappointed that they're kind of rolling them out ahead of time. I want to be surprised.
Yeah, I don't like when companies do this. I know they're trying to get more out of their marketing budget. They're trying to get a longer runway here, but I think you launch it in the Super Bowl and then you have something that continues afterwards. I don't think you roll it out early. I don't like that at all.
Yeah, no, I don't either. I like to be surprised. I think that's the fun of it. That's part of the reason why we watch. You know, it may be in this case you want to get the commercial. I've seen your commercial. Time for me to get up.
Yeah, seriously. If we've seen 3 or 4 of what we feel like are going to be the funniest commercials before a Super Bowl, I'm going to be less likely to stick around and watch all the commercials for a game.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts.
I would agree with that. We'll talk more about some of that and the nonsensical stuff during our Ask Anything segment later on. So let's get into some Bengals talk here because we've got the radio row going on at Super Bowl, so it means a lot of the Bengals players are there and talking to media members. And Skinny, if you're watching this podcast, is clearly having a good time covering all of it. Hopefully you are checking us out on YouTube because you don't want to miss Skinny's reactions to my questions. Skinny, Joe Burrow today, as we're recording this on Thursday, was asked, we don't have to go back through everything because we've been talking about it every week seemingly, but he was asked if he'd be willing to restructure his contract to help keep everyone together. I thought that was the most interesting thing that came out of all the new stuff today. And he reacted immediately and said, of course. I thought that was notable because it's been mentioned that he sort of insinuated that that would be the case. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that he has directly said, of course, I will restructure my contract to help keep these other guys around.
And I've talked about that ad nauseum since the night he spoke in Dallas. And I also want to be, I don't think for anybody thinking restructure means he's taking money out of his pocket and off the table. It's restructuring, in my opinion, the way the contract itself is structured, which means he's probably looking to get a signing bonus that they can prorate as opposed to some base year salaries. I think that's all that means. And I think that's a no-brainer in my opinion.
Is there the potential to defer money?
I don't think so. I guess that's a good question. You know, if I'm an athlete, it certainly has worked out for some other athletes. That's a good question. I don't know if you can do that or not, or how much you can do of that. That's a good question.
He was also asked if he has faith the Bengals ownership will be willing to spend and get all of these deals done. He said, I do. We have the cap space to get it done. I want to make it happen. Everyone involved, Trey, T, Jamar, Mike G, we all want to stay together. When you have guys that are motivated like that, I think you can get those things done. He's been very straightforward about it. He continues to say the same things over and over. How much pressure, or is there any pressure being put on the Bengals front office here by Joe Burrow? And at some point, do you think this becomes like a bit too much from Joe Burrow? Like, does it become annoying at some point?
I almost brought that up on last week's podcast. I'm at the point of just shut up. I mean, honestly, just shut up. I know fans think this is really good because he's putting pressure on the front office. Ain't nobody put pressure on that front office. Now, they may do these things because they feel they're the right things to do. They feel they can get them done financially. They feel like it still gives them financial wiggle room, all of those things. But I don't think that this is doing anything other than just the narrative just has gotten nauseating, in my opinion.
So I was feeling that a little bit too. And I did step back somewhat because I question, is this a Joe Burrow issue or is this a media issue? Because he's saying the same thing over and over. He's being asked to do these interviews, so it's not really his fault to do them.
Understood.
And we are just making a big deal out of it constantly every time he speaks.
I think that's it. I will say that the question about restructuring the contract had not been asked up until this point. So that was a worthwhile question, and I think a pretty worthwhile answer. It doesn't surprise me. Like I said, I've been talking about this for a while, that in order to get this done, he knew he was going to have to be part of the process and restructure. So it doesn't surprise me. But again, we didn't get a chance to talk to him after the season. We tried to get a press conference with him like we did last year. Now, last year, obviously, we hadn't talked to him since he had the wrist surgery and broken the wrist. So he did do a press conference with us. Chose not to this time around. It's certainly his prerogative. And so we haven't spoken to him since the night of the last game of the season. And he brought it up, obviously, starting with the Dallas game a couple of different times about believing it can get done. And he has to have the knowledge of that he's going to have to be a part of that. And nothing's changed for me since that night in Dallas. It all pieces itself together. Now it's a matter of, will they get it done?
So I know everyone hears this and goes, yeah, great job, Joe. Put pressure on the cheap Bengals. They've got to do what's right. But if we're listening to what Joe Burrow wants to do right now, that means they've got one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. They'll have the highest paid pass rusher in the NFL. They'll have the highest paid receiver and a second receiver who's going to make top 5-ish, top 10-ish type money now potentially on this new contract, and a highly paid tight end who hasn't really accomplished all that much. I mean, Skinny, at some point, this just, I mean, it's nice of Joe Burrow to say because he's got to take up for his guys, but it's just not realistic, is it?
Well, it is. I thought The Athletic, they do it every year. It's the first time I've decided to do it. They do a nice exercise. Paul Dehner Jr. puts together, and people at The Athletic, a spreadsheet of where they stand cap-wise, who you can cut to add additional cap space, and then what you can do. And so I'm doing two. I did one on Monday. You can find it on local12.com, where I extended Jamar. The thing that this doesn't take into account, this just affects the 2025 cap. So when the Bengals are making these decisions, they have to see how it affects the cap in 26, 7, 8, 9, and so on. And there's going to be a lot of cap space for them there, so they can play with this. I extended T. It cost $23 million this year, again, because the Bengals will backload contracts. Again, whenever you see a contract in the NFL, you'll see 4 years and $110 million. Well, that player may not get all the 110 because a lot of that might be base salary in year 4, and teams can get out from under it. That's where you get cap casualties that take place. So anyway, after all was said and done, there's $46 million cap space that over the cap shows. There's $49 in cap space currently that Spot Rack shows. As Paul noted in his article, and I've written this before in every free agency story I've done every offseason, you got to subtract about 10 to 15 mil off what you see of cap space for what the Bengals account for, and they're right to account for it. You got to account for signing draft picks. You got to account for paying the practice squad. You got to account for paying for a full 53-player roster instead of just accounting for the top 51. You got to account for injuries in season where you have to go sign some people. You got to account for incentive bonuses that people got. You got to account for those kind of things. It's real money. You can't just go, hey, you got $49 million. Okay, they don't. They have probably, in the way Paul did the exercise, he cut it down to $32 million. Maybe it's $34 million, but we use $32 million. I cut 5 players to add some cap space. See if you think I'm wrong. I cut Sam Hubbard, Sheldon Rankins, Jermaine Pratt, Alex Kappa, Zach Moss. I did keep Geno Stone. That gave me an additional $35.5 million. So I had $67.5 million to play with. I extended T. It cost me $23 million. I extended Trey. It only cost me $3 million because don't forget, whatever extension is going to be done, the only money it's going to extra account on this year's contract, because he's already under contract, would be a signing bonus. That would get prorated. Let's just say it's $6 million for 2 years, $8 million. They used the number $3 million for this year. That's fine. Again, this is not as Paul points out, this is not a perfect exercise. And I was then able to go get Brandon Scherf as a guard. I was able to get Jeremy Chin as a safety. I was able to go get Poona Ford as a cheap defensive tackle. I spent a first-round pick on a defensive end from Georgia. Spent a second-round pick on Deion Walker, the defensive tackle from Kentucky. Those didn't cost me anything because I'm already accounting for them in that 10 to 15 mil that accounts for draft picks, etc. I signed Dre Greenlaw for $6 million as a linebacker. I re-signed Cody Ford as a guard. So I was able to do a lot of things. I actually took it down to where I only had $300,000 left, so I took it almost all the way to the max. I was able to fix it, maybe not perfectly, maybe not the way fans would have liked, and maybe not the way it takes place. But then I'm going to do an exercise tomorrow on Friday of what can I do with money if I don't extend T. That will be as interesting to me as anything else, to see what better players can I get at multiple positions, and then probably spend a first-round pick on a wide receiver, and then maybe go sign a free agent mid-level wide receiver. It's very interesting how this is all going to shake out.
That's a big part of this, Skinny, because that's the prism I'm looking at this through, is not just that can you re-sign all these players or not? Okay, great. If you can bring them all back, that's fine. But your team was not good enough last year. You didn't make the playoffs with all of these guys. So I'm not interested in running it back with the same group and just spending a bunch more money on them. I want the rest of the team to be much better. And my concern is when you start talking about bringing all of these guys back, can you improve other areas of the team?
Yeah, I think they can. I mean, I don't know by what increments. Like, I'm taking on Dre Greenlaw, counting on him to be the 2022-2023 Dre Greenlaw before he hurt his Achilles in the Super Bowl and missed almost all of this season. And then he came back for like the last 2 or 3 games, and he got hurt on his other leg. So I'm counting on a healthy Dre Greenlaw, right? Again, that's my way to go. They may look and go, we tapped the tires on it. He's too injured, and we can't do it. And maybe they don't cut Jermaine Pratt either. I mean, Jermaine – I think he accounted for 8.5. He accounts for 8.5 mil. That's 2.5 mil more than Dre Greenlaw. Do I take the bird in the hand, which I would hope? I think the other part too that has to be added to the mix is Al Golden evaluating these players and determining, okay, I can get more out of Jermaine Pratt. Heck, I can get more out of Jordan Battle and Geno Stone than was gotten there. I'd like to get Mike Hilton back. It's going to cost us 10 mil. Or you say, no, I think this is what we can do that. At the corner spots, I moved Dax Hill to the slot. That may not be what they want to do. So I think some of that, Al Golden figures into that mix of telling the front office, most of these guys, I can get more out of them.
He was here in 2021, Al Golden, that is. Would he have coached Jermaine Pratt then?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He talked glowingly of those guys. Jermaine Pratt, he even brought up Keandre Jones, who was basically a practice squad. So he remembered all those guys and talked about them. So yeah, I mean, no, he did coach them.
That is an interesting thing to factor in then, because those guys probably when they were a little bit younger, and that's plays a role. They're now older, so that could be part of the decline. But when they were younger and playing a little bit better, he was their position coach. So maybe he would have a different view on what their value is going forward than someone else might. So that's something interesting to factor in for sure.
But I would say they do have the financial wiggle room to do all this and still make their team better. The question, though, to my point is I want to see how much better can I make it if I don't re-sign T.
Well, that's interesting to note that you feel that way too, because Burrow has said this, like, we do have the space to make this happen, and he has insinuated that he's had those conversations. He hasn't insinuated, he has said, we've had those conversations as an organization, and today he did say that he would restructure his deal if necessary. So it does feel like maybe we are getting closer and closer to this whole thing becoming a reality of all these guys coming back. I'm still not sure that that's the best route for this organization or not, but I know that's what fans want to hear at this moment. One other thing that he said that I thought was interesting was they brought up the preseason thing, and Stephen A. Smith was chastising him and the Bengals for starting slow every year, having the rough Septembers, and so they asked him, like, do you think you need to do something differently or get better prepared in some way? And he actually brought up the fact that he would like to play a quarter here and a quarter there in the preseason. He feels like that would be better for him to get into a rhythm. You think there's anything to that? Do you think at some point Zach Taylor just says, I'm going to do it just to quiet the comments about it in the offseason?
I wouldn't be shocked if it's not this coming preseason that they do that, just for mostly for that, to be honest with you. And if Joe feels that way and you're Zach, you go, okay, and maybe you tell him, I'm going to let you throw 2 passes. I'm going to let you throw this pass and that pass. I mean, don't forget he played a handful of snaps in this preseason. Was pretty sharp in the one series he played. But maybe he feels like he needs more run. I don't know. I still go back to extenuating circumstances for a lot of these slow starts, from a Burrow appendectomy to Burrow coming off of a knee to Jamar Chase and his hold in this year, to them not trusting Joe's wrist fully when this year started. And maybe you would have gained more trust if you'd have gotten more live reps, but they got some live reps in 2 joint practices. So I don't know. I know it's an easy narrative because the numbers suggest the numbers don't lie, I guess, in that regard, because they've just been awful in the first 2 games of the Zach Taylor era. But I think there's just been a lot of extenuating circumstances around. Hell, the one year they beat Pittsburgh, if the long snapper doesn't get hurt, and you have to put a substitute long snapper. Was that because of the way you handled training camp, or was that a freak injury to your long snapper in the middle of a game?
Well, I mean, Burrow did throw, 5 interceptions?
5 interceptions, yeah.
So, I mean, there is that. He did start slow in addition to
that was his appendectomy year.
Yeah, and I do think there are a lot of extenuating circumstances, but I also, especially after watching Ohio State and the way it went for them this year, it feels the Ryan Day thing felt so similar to the Zach Taylor thing of, why, when you have the best players on the field, are you so conservative early in the season? And then they got desperate late and they went on that insane run to a national championship. It feels like the Bengals kind of do the same thing in the NFL season every year, where they start slow, they get themselves in a position where we're bringing up all the stats of you got a 12% chance to make the playoffs if you start 0-3. We do it every year, and they get desperate and they start taking more chances and playing more aggressively on the offensive side of things, and they go on a big run and make it close late. So I think my biggest issue is not the prep time or Joe Burrow needing to get in a better rhythm. I think there is a real issue with the way they approach the first couple of games of the year, because they seem to be more conservative in those games.
Yeah, I would say, though, too, let's go back to the Kansas City game. You win that game if not for a freak penalty on a rookie safety, right? I mean,
that's true. That's a legit response to that. I mean, they have had some circumstances, not that have held them back, but that have just cost them the games in the final moments too, and that's a great example. So a couple other things here on the Bengals. Trey Hendrickson made some comments on the Pat McAfee show this week. He basically said, I guess the big comment that everyone's noting is he basically said that he found out about Duke Toman's comments on his future and the Bengals' plans for him via his dad reading a tweet. And that has brought about a lot of conversation with the Bengals' lack of communication when it comes to these situations. What is your take on that, Skinny?
Yeah, listen, I think Trey's a bit of a lunkhead, but I'm kind of with him. I mean, if communication's a big thing, and that was one of the things that Zach Taylor talked about when he took the job of, he wanted open lines of communication. Now, this is not his job to talk to Trey about contracts. I'm just talking about that was a big thing for Zach. Why can't that trickle up more often?
I don't understand that. And here's the thing about Trey Hendrickson. I really want to be against Trey Hendrickson in this situation because he annoys me with his comments and the whole thing he did last year. But the issue is there's a whole lot of evidence supporting Trey Hendrickson's side of things. The Bengals have done this, and other players have complained about this after they left the organization for years. And Mo Egger laid that out perfectly in his show yesterday.
Yeah, no, I think Trey was completely, and his agent were completely in the wrong last year, right after you'd signed an extension to go, I want more now. No, that's not how this works. Now, this time around, Trey seeking an extension or saying, if not, maybe hopefully they can trade me and get some draft picks to help them win a Super Bowl. I think that was a nice way to say, pay me or trade me. But in this case, I don't disagree with him. Listen, at his age, it's time to get paid again. If you're him, somebody's going to pay him. And, he wants it to be the Bengals. And I think that this time around, I fully understand where he's coming from. Last year, in way over his head, making that demand, and of course then retracted it very quickly, like, oh, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to play. I'm sorry. I love Cincinnati. I love all you guys. And I'm like, yeah, you were never going to retire. That was so silly. But I think I didn't think he came off as, super demanding. I thought it was just pretty matter of fact of, hopefully we can get an extension worked out. And if not, then I hope they trade me and get some picks that help them win. That's a nice way to say it.
But here's the problem when you act like an idiot last year. I don't want to hear it from you now. Like, had you just waited till this year when it was the right time to say these things and you said it in this way, we'd be like, hey, Trey Hendrickson's team guy. This is the right way to handle this type of thing. But you already went out and made an ass of yourself this year, and now you're trying to save face by doing the. Is this, by the way, is this the new way we're going to do this thing? The new way to say I'm done with this place is to say I want the Bengals to win a Super Bowl, whether that's with me or to trade me to get better pieces so they win a Super Bowl without me. That's what I want to happen. That's an interesting way to say that.
That's trying to keep the fans on your side in all of this.
Yeah, I wonder which agent crafted that PR move, because that's a pretty good line.
And listen, the narrative of the Bengals front office is a fair one. They've handled a lot of things in just a horrifyingly bad way. And whatever stones are cast their way in all of this, they've fully deserved.
And that's the problem. It's like, as much as I want to be against Trey Hendrickson here because of the way he handled it last year, it's like, well, problem is, he's probably right. The fact that he's finding these things out through a tweet is probably wrong on the Bengals' behalf. And other players have gotten mad about this same exact thing in the past, and it's probably cost them certain players through free agency that they weren't able to re-sign as a result. Also, another thing that came out this week is, as you mentioned, it's silly season, so we're getting all the Bengals would be a great landing spot for this guy, or the Bengals could be trying to trade for this guy. Yeah, Cooper Kupp is one of the big names now. The Bengals and the Steelers are the betting odds favorites at plus 500 to land him. I assume you think that is not going to happen.
No, that's not going to happen. Unless he wants to play for $2 million. I mean, he's injury prone. He's in his 30s. No, thank you. Listen, guy made a lot out of his career, and hopefully he gets some money that he's seeking. But no.
in a move that I think would be even less likely to happen, someone wrote this week that the Bengals would be a good landing spot for Browns pass rusher Myles Garrett, and so that is making its rounds.
Sure.
Can I go ahead and completely dismiss that idea?
So let's pay for Myles Garrett, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, and then literally we'll have everybody else on a rookie contract.
Well, Myles Garrett and Trey Hendrickson. Don't
That's
forget.
what I said.
We have two pass rushers, yeah.
Yeah, no, I said Trey. Yeah,
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
Yeah, that one's not going to happen either. And then from a draft perspective, which at this point, who knows? Everyone's doing a mock draft, but the Draft Network mock draft had one that I thought was particularly interesting when they said with the number 17 overall pick, Keith Sanchez, their writer, predicted that the Bengals will draft running back Ashton Genty from Boise State. What is the likelihood of that happening?
0 to none. I mean, talk about a position that you don't need at the moment. You need a backup. You need a backup to Chase Brown, and a solid backup at that. Because I still question some durability issues, but no. Sorry, little guy.
All right. Well, those were some of the headlines that were making their ways around.
Sorry, Dirty Sanchez. No, thank you.
Yep. Bengals social media. Shout out to Dirty Sanchez for his mock draft, but I do not think the Bengals will be getting the Heisman hopeful Ashton Genty. All right. Speaking of college football, while we're on the subject, Pete Carroll hired Ohio State offensive coordinator Chip Kelly to be the Raiders' new offensive coordinator. Ohio State has now lost its offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, along with some other coaches after winning the national championship. The Buckeyes are reportedly going to make Brian Hartline the lone offensive coordinator again. He was named offensive coordinator in 2023, but then was made co-coordinator when Chip Kelly was brought in last season. He'll go back to being the lone coordinator himself. Do you think going back to Hartline is the right call here, Skinny?
Yeah, I would say probably. I mean, you know that's where I know people sometimes poo-poo in-house hires, right? It's just a buddy. No, you've worked with the guy, you trust the guy, you know the guy, and that's probably the right move for Ryan Day to make. I find the Jim Knowles situation, we talked about it last week, way more fascinating than this. I do wonder. I mean, the Chip Kelly experiment in the NFL didn't work the first time around or the second time around. Why is it going to work the third time around?
Yeah, but do you think there's a difference with him as just a play caller versus? I mean, obviously the head coach thing definitely doesn't work out. Do you think he can be better as maybe a play caller?
Maybe, but again, I wasn't overly enamored with him as a play caller at Ohio State.
I would agree. I mean, until the end, he finished it off pretty well. But prior to that, yeah, I think there were plenty of questions, and a lot of people were asking them. With Hartline, I think the thing you face here is he's Jeremiah Smith's guy. He's the wide receivers position coach. He recruited Jeremiah Smith. He's also their ace recruiter from an offensive standpoint. He gets a lot of their top guys. So you do wonder if you make another decision. It's like, all right, you kind of already undercut him a little bit to bring in Chip Kelly last year. That was maybe a unique situation because you felt like you were bringing in this big name, experienced guy that brought something different to your coaching staff. If you were to go out and just get whoever you feel like the top defensive coordinator is in college or offensive coordinator is in college football right now and put him in that position over Hartline again, or made him a co-coordinator again with someone else, you have to think Hartline might start taking a little bit of offense to that and looking to move on.
Yeah, and if I'm not going to scheme up 12 to 15 targets a game for Jeremiah Smith next year.
How hard is that to do, right?
Exactly.
I mean, just throw the ball to number 4. Now, the thing is, you do have to figure out how to pay number 4. And I imagine that coming off the national championship, they'll figure out how to do just that.
I would agree.
All right, let's go to college basketball, which, Skinny, if you don't have any objections, I'm opening with my Norse. I mean, I want to talk
about it. It was good for them. It was a nice win.
Yeah, they went up to Michigan over the weekend. They lost to Detroit on Thursday, 68-57, and things were looking pretty dark. It's a 6-game losing streak.
I listened to a chunk of that game, Rick, with you and Jim Kelch, and it sounded depressing. The background sounded depressing. The performance sounded depressing, and I thought, that's it. That's the end of this season.
I counted 187 people in the arena at tip-off. That was both upper and lower section there at Detroit, if you've ever seen how their gym is set up, which is an interesting setup for certain. But then the Norse did turn it around later that weekend. They went to Oakland, and they beat a pretty good Oakland team in their gym by scoring 84 points. They won that game 84-75, followed that up with a win over the top team in the conference, Cleveland State, on Wednesday night, 85-75. That game was in Highland Heights at Truist Arena. They host Robert Morris on Saturday at 2 p.m. Skinny, are you like me and drinking the 3 days in March Kool-Aid that's coming out of Highland Heights and just believing they might have done it again?
Well, I mean, we talked about it's never too late to get on a run, and maybe this is the start of the run that carries itself into the postseason. You know, they still can position themselves for what are they, 2 games out? I'm looking at it at the moment. 2 games out of the 5 seed, 2.5 games out of the 4 seed, 2 games out of the 5 seed at the moment in the loss column. Technically 2 games for both in the loss column. My question for you, though, is this fool's gold the last 2 games offensively, or have they found something?
Well, I think that's what everyone's interested in. And Dan Goretzka, who, if you've listened to this show, you've heard me talk about him a lot to the point that I think people were thinking I'm an idiot because before the season, I'm like, I think he's going to be potentially their best player. He starts the first few games, doesn't do anything, and then he's almost unplayable for a lot of the season. I mean, the last time they played Cleveland State a few weeks ago, he didn't play a single minute in that game. And then things weren't going well. They decided to go back to the Division II transfer and tried to give him another shot at it because he does have some athleticism and talent that they don't otherwise have. And for whatever reason, it stuck this time, Skinny. I mean, you saw what he did at Oakland with the 22 points. Then last night he follows it up with 4 more three-pointers, scores 26 points, and was just, lights out. It's not just threes either. He's using that athleticism to beat guys off the dribble and have some crazy acrobatic finishes, floating it high off the glass and all types of things. I mean, his performance last night was one of the more special moments in Truist Arena that I can remember watching.
Was it just this adjustment period at Division I level, even a mid-major level, you think?
I think he was really dealing with some confidence issues. And I know that's kind of like a weird thing to say. It's hard to define it because it's a feeling. We can't see it. We can't put a number on it or anything or quantify it. But there were just so many turnovers. He'd get in the game and turn the ball over almost instantly. And it was like he was overwhelmed. He didn't have faith in his own athletic abilities to do what he's capable of doing initially. And I think he just had to get past that. And now he is. And he realizes that, hey, wait, even though I'm up at the Division I level now, I'm still the best athlete on the floor in a lot of these games. And that's starting to show through. He's been really fun to watch the last 2 games. And because of that, I do think it's sustainable if he can continue this, because when you bump Sam Vincent down a peg, when you bump Trey Robinson down a peg, or they just have someone else out there making plays to help them out a little bit, taking some pressure off them, now they're even more effective. And now a guy like LJ Wells and Keena Tijere is giving you more, and Randall Pettis is giving. It's amazing the trickle-down effect Dan Goretzka has had on everybody else. And in addition to him playing well, the entire team is also kind of, at some point, they just got fed up. Like, losing, we've had enough of this losing stuff. Let's play the way we know we're capable of. And it's been a perfect storm the last few games.
And it really is all about trying to push buttons for 3 days in March. That's literally what it's about. I know it sucks when your team loses and it's no fun to be a part of as a fan or even as a broadcaster or whatever. But it is about, at some point, if you can get something going, which looks like they have, maybe it gets sustainable through March.
I don't know that I've ever seen a turnaround like this for a team that, for 2 games. They had a 6-game stretch where they were as bad as they've been since they've been at the Division I level almost, or at least in the Horizon League era. And then the last 2 games, they've been as good as anyone in the conference, including Cleveland State, who had only lost 1 game in league play to this point. They are 6-7 now in the Horizon League. That's 7th place. They're half game ahead of Wright State, which is always good to see in the standings. And they play the team that's sitting in the current 4 seed right now, Robert Morris, this weekend. They host them. Robert Morris is 9-5. So they've got a little ways to go to catch up to them, but especially playing them head-to-head this weekend, they've got a chance to get back in there. I think the 4 seed is still in play.
Yeah, that would actually put them 1 game behind in the loss column. 1.5 games overall because Robert Morris has 9 wins. So, yeah, you got a chance to close the gap very quickly.
Yeah, if they continue to play like they are right now, they have a real chance to play themselves back into a top 4 seed, and anything's possible once you get into the postseason, as we've seen. All right, let's go to number 14, Kentucky, Skinny. They lost at home to Cal and unranked Arkansas 89-79 over the weekend, and then went on the road and lost at number 25, Ole Miss, 98-84. They host South Carolina at noon on Saturday. I say 98-84 like it's shocking, but the real shocking part of that game was when they were down by like 28 points in the first half.
54-31 at halftime. It was brutal. I didn't watch it. We were playing a game that night on the road, and so all I kept seeing was I saw the score, and I watched the score as we were driving home on the bus. Two of the strangest things, 2 rare occurrences happened in that game. One good for Kentucky, one just the damnedest thing I've ever seen. So they
can I guess the second one?
Yes.
24 assists and 1 turnover? I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
And I didn't see the turnover, but I heard the next day, I think it was an unforced error where a guy just dribbled it off his foot.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. It tells me 1 or 2 things. Good for Ole Miss for taking care of the basketball, but more so Kentucky and the score dictates this, and we've seen it throughout the year. They're not very tough, and they don't defend. And they defend even less without Lamont Butler on the floor.
Yeah, that's my question, Skinny. How much of this losing skid, the rough play recently, has just been about Lamont Butler not being there?
I think a good chunk of it. I will say this: I think Arkansas has found something. They followed up the Kentucky win with another road win. I think it was over Texas last night. They were a 7 or 8 point underdog, and they went and won by 7 or 8. I think that gives them 3 wins in a row. So they've, as goofy as it sounds, they lost their best player arguably in Boogie Flan. They may have found something with a shorter rotation. And so maybe some of that's Arkansas related too. But I would say this: um, I think they missed the glue factor of Lamont Butler as a defender, as a primary ball handler. I don't think he's a super creator, but he can score when he needs to score. He can create when he needs to create. And I just think he gives them a level of toughness that they just simply don't have. Now, don't forget, they beat Gonzaga and won at Tennessee without him. I can give you mitigating circumstances at Tennessee, going 11 for 45 on threes, and a lot of the 34 misses, honestly, were really clean looks that Tennessee just didn't make. This team is just it's embarrassingly bad defensively, and I don't know what the answer is without Lamont Butler, because they're still going to play a chunk of this without him. There's hope that he gets back the last week or so of the season and then into the postseason tournament and then in the NCAA tournament. But I don't know what other buttons Mark Pope can push, at least in man-to-man defense, because they don't play it very well.
Yeah, I mean they're outside the top 100 in defensive efficiency now.
102, I believe.
Yeah, and I mean the other part of the Lamont Butler thing is I've heard rumblings that Kirk Kriisa is not trying to come back at this point.
That's strange to me because he seems like a very enthusiastic guy. It felt like 2 weeks ago he was going to be back, and he still isn't.
It's become weird all of a sudden because it seemed like he was out of the boot. He was moving around on it. They were talking positively, and Pope was providing updates. And then all of a sudden, communication there's just kind of died off. And it feels very much like a guy who may decided, you know what? I can preserve my year of eligibility and take another crack at it in the transfer portal, getting another big check.
That's what I was wondering. I mean, I didn't know if he burned through whatever he could do for a redshirt year. I guess not.
Actually, let's check right now, see how many games he's played, because I did not look at that. But I have heard rumblings that that's what's going on here. And by the way, even if you've played the amount of games in today's era, it's like, a waiver, a lawsuit, and who knows what happens if you want to get out. Yeah. Oh, interestingly enough, you know how many games you're allowed to play to still hold your eligibility for a red shirt?
I would say 10.
10, because it's under 30% of your games. Yep. You know how many he's played?
10.
9.
9. My bad. Yeah, 9.
So that's I'm starting to think that's exactly what's happening here. It's the Trey Green situation at Xavier, right?
And honestly, as much as you want to blame the player, you can't. I don't.
Not today's
basketball world, I don't.
It's the issue with not having more guardrails in place, multi-year contracts, all of these things. I mean, for the players who want to make their most money possible, this is in their best interest. If they're not having the exact role that they want, you play 9 games, you figure it out, and then you sit out. Now, do I like that? No, I think it is terrible for the sport. It feels disgusting. It's awful for the
sport, but I get it.
But I kind of get why it's happening, and unfortunately, I think we're going to continue to see it. Kentucky is still a top 4 seed on bracket matrix right now, even though I feel like it's the whole state is melting down. If you listen to Kentucky fans, they've had quite the roller coaster already this season, Skinny.
No, they're already out on Pope. Should have hired Pitino. Can we get
out?
But
they were going to the Final Four 3 weeks ago.
Can we get out from under his contract after this year or next year? We're not going to make the NCAA tournament. Listen, unless they totally would melt down and lose literally every game the rest of the way, and that's not going to happen. They're going to still be actually a decent seed in the NCAA tournament. If they pull themselves up by the bootstraps and steal a win that they maybe shouldn't, like Tuesday against Tennessee because it's at home, go to beat Auburn at home late in the year. You still got those. You're still playing yourself on the 3-4 seed line for all the hand wringing. But right now there is an issue. It's the first real bump in the road for Mark Pope. He seems I want to phrase this correctly because I like Mark a lot. He seems totally at a loss for words at the moment after the last 2 games. Like he doesn't know what buttons to push, and maybe there aren't buttons to push. That it's like, I can't fix this at the moment. It's got to fix itself.
Yeah, and the whole shucks, I don't cuss, happy guy thing. It's great when everything's positive, but then when you get into this situation, people don't want to hear from that guy. They want to hear from the guy that's authoritative and that feels like they're disciplinarian. It feels like they're MFing guys in practice and throwing and kicking things. I mean, literally, Kentucky Sports Radio is having to report that he has broken some furniture that you haven't seen inside the locker room when they've been playing poorly because Kentucky fans don't think he's being hard enough on the guys. So
everybody wants fire and brimstone coach. And listen, I'm probably one of those guys that is fire and brimstone coach, but I fully respect those coaches that do it with a different style and have success with it. Because I've said it 1,000 times. People blame Zach Taylor for not ripping into his players. You got to be true to your personality. And I think that's what shines through to players. Whether it's fire and brimstone or whether it's laid back guy.
I agree with that, but you better be true to your personality. I'll say that. Like the whole happy-go-lucky and the all shucks thing and the I don't cuss it, like that stuff wears really thin when you're not successful. So it really better be who you are. That's all I would say about it, because I find that stuff to come off as pretty phony a lot of times and it doesn't play well.
No, but I also think, to your point, fans want to see fire and brimstone coach at all times.
Yes, and that's not realistic either.
No.
Cincinnati, Skinny, they lost Sunday at home against West Virginia, 63-50. We've got Sean Kilpatrick taking shots. We've got pretty much every former player in UC history on social media telling Wes Miller how to do his job better and telling the players that they're not showing enough pride. But then they bounced back on Wednesday and came through with an improbable 93-83 win at UCF. They host BYU on Saturday night. What are your thoughts on where the Bearcats are at right now?
Well, I'll give him this. He made a lineup change, right? He took Dan Skillings out, who's been underperforming greatly over the last month or so, put Dede Thomas in the starting lineup, and I think he gave him some nice juice, both as a scorer and a distributor. I think it helped that he's in the lineup with Jizzle. I think it helped lead to Aziz Bandego going 7 for 8 and Dylan Mitchell going whatever the hell he was, 9 for 14. I don't know how sustainable it will be for those guys to be scorers, but I thought at least he had to do something, and he did something.
Yeah, the fact that they were able to get Dylan Mitchell and Aziz off for, Dylan Mitchell had 19, Bandego had 16. The fact that they got those guys going was interesting to me. And to your point, it's like, well, it did seem like they were trying to play with a little more tempo. Some of the things we talked about, they looked a little different on offense, and they certainly got their points in a different way than they typically do. Is that because they tried something else and they're going with a new wrinkle, or is that it was a good matchup for them against UCF that didn't stop their athletic front court, and we know what those guys typically do from an offensive standpoint?
Yeah, and I won't be able to answer that. Neither will you. Neither will even Wes Miller until they play another hard opponent on the road, or maybe whatever. And those skills come fast in the league. In fact, I was just trying to call up their schedule. I mean, they've got 2 very winnable games coming up: BYU at home and Utah at home. So maybe it's sustainable enough to gain confidence in doing it that way.
Yeah, to me, with this UC team, it almost doesn't feel like it matters who they're playing right now. It feels like it's so much more about them.
Well, yeah, I thought the West Virginia game, I watched it on ESPN Plus. I mean, a lot of ESPN Plus UC games, I'll listen to the radio more, but it was a Sunday when nothing else was on. I'm like, I'm going to watch this fully just to see what this looks like. Listen, I have no dog in the fight. I'm not a UC graduate, but I'm obviously in the media around here, and I love basketball. I was embarrassed for everybody in that game. Everybody. And I'm like, you don't bounce back from something like you just don't, in my opinion. This was not only the low point, but you're going to be lucky to scratch out another win. Well, he did make a little bit of a tweak the lineup. Good for him. It worked. Again, was it just roll the dice on something and, okay, I found it? Or was this one where he thinks this is something you can do moving forward? We're going to find out. Because, again, I think you're going to know about this team in the next 2 home games because they are both winnable. And I think BYU is really good, but you're at home, and they're both winnable.
I can't remember when it was. Our buddy Jed Demusey probably knows exactly. I think he had quotes hanging up in the local 12 sports room office back there. But when Mick Cronin ran into a rough patch at one point with UC, he said that he was going to hold open tryouts the following week for the team to try to get them back on track. He just needed toughness, kind of all those types of things, similar to what he said about this UCLA team. Wes Miller went with a different approach this week, Skinny. He said he let them play dodgeball at practice to start this week and loosen the guys up. Is that a move? Which move would you go with as a head coach? Are you more of a hold open tryouts guy or play dodgeball guy?
No, believe it or not, here's what I would do. And as a freshman coach, you write a crazy wave, right? Because this guy's new to high school basketball, especially when you're a smaller school, you're playing classes that. I mean, literally, as a Beechwood freshman coach for 6 years, I cut 1 kid. 1 kid is all I cut. Some of these teams are cutting 15 guys and keeping 12. And so we'd always hit a rough patch. And honestly, I would usually go into a practice, and I know they were waiting for me to just lie into them about toughness because I'm all about physical toughness and mental toughness and just we're going to out-tough the other team even if we're not as talented. But when we hit a rough patch, I swear to God, this is true, we'd play around the world for an hour in practice. We'd play the old game of around the world. If you don't know what that is, you start with a layup. You go to the corner. If you miss, you can challenge it. And if you miss again, you have to start back to the free throw. And it seemed to loosen everything up. I don't know why. It was a basketball-related event, but kids seem to enjoy it, get light in the mood. It also helped, as a kind of a shooting practice as well. And it killed a good hour and got kind of people back on track. So I was more of an around the world guy.
Yeah, I'll. Someone needs to send that over to Wes if he needs any
Yeah,
fresh ideas for this week. Switch it up to around the world.
Yeah.
Keep them loose. All right, Xavier. Xavier took down Georgetown Tuesday, 74-69. They traveled to Villanova on Sunday, and I mean, every game right now is the biggest game for Xavier, but this Villanova game at Villanova is currently, as things currently stand, their last chance at a quad one win.
That's the big part to me. This would be the piece to the resume to get and then win all the other games you're supposed to win. I mean, I told you is 8-1 possible, 7-2. I thought 7-2 was one that gets them in, but this would be in the 7 category, one you'd have to get. Then if I say that, well, at that point, I'm not sure they do lose 2 or can afford, because then it becomes not just not a great win the rest of the way. It would be maybe in some cases a bad loss. So, yeah, I think this is a huge, huge win for all those reasons. You don't have a lot of quad one wins on a resume. You get a chance to get a final one here, and then you have a winnable schedule the rest of the way that you control the narrative of. And I think that's all you can ask for if you're Xavier after the hole they dug themselves.
I think that's the big part of it here. This game lets Xavier control their narrative the rest of the way. They're currently 6 spots out of the field, according to Bracket Matrix. If they win this game, quad one game on the road at Villanova, I think most bracketologists will put them into the field at that point.
Yeah, I'd have to look at I looked at Bracket Matrix this morning too and saw that, and because that's where I wanted to see how far Kentucky's fallen. And I realized they literally slipped from the bottom of the 3 seed line to the top of the 4 seed line, so it wasn't a huge slip. But I did see that, and to me, that, yeah, to your point, I think that's the case. I know you don't look at Jerry Palmer, Joe Lunardi, but they've got them very close to being on the. I think Lunardi had him as the second team out, if I'm not mistaken. So that shows you that in whatever you want to look at, that they're extraordinarily close. This then bumps you up a notch, and then you have to control the rest of the way. You can control the rest of the way.
Yeah, and it feels like right now, I mean, as you've pointed out, if they lose this one, it's not the end of the road. They might still be able to go, 8-1 or whatever down the stretch, and they'll play their way in. But it feels like at that point, you're hoping the UCFs of the world continue to lose. You're hoping some of these teams falter down the stretch and you need some help. If you win this one, then it feels like you just have to continue to win, keep your head above the water. You're in the field.
Yeah, and if you're teetering on that first 4 out, however you want to look at it from whatever bracketology or bracket matrix you want to look at, then you're holding your breath come conference tournament time that there's not a bid stealer from a conference, because that knocks you down another peg, and you can't control anything about that. So that puts you even in a tougher spot. You want to, honestly, when conference tournaments begin, you want to find yourself, in whosever opinion it is, firmly in the field at that point.
Yeah. Dalen Swain led Xavier with 18.6 rebounds, 4 assists in the most recent win over Georgetown. Marcus Foster had a double-double with 17 points and 13 rebounds.
That number was amazing for me.
Which one? The 17 points?
13 rebounds. The 13 rebounds for Marcus Foster.
Yeah, that's impressive. And he's, been a little up and down, but when he brings it, he's tough. He's made some big shots. He's had some big rebounds. He's had some big defensive moments for Xavier. I think he could, if they do get into the tournament, he could be one of those, like, we've talked about this a little bit on my Xavier podcast. Remember Malcolm Bernard that transferred in for a year and played that role on that team that made the run into the tournament? I could see him kind of playing that role where he has some big moments on a NCAA tournament run.
By the way, shout out to the Xavier medical staff or whatever salves or balms that they use on guys, because Zach Fremantle, I thought his leg was going to fall off and wasn't going to play again. And Dalen Swain had to be carried off the floor and plays the very next game and then balls out a game later.
Yeah, he had the whole ankle thing, and it was like, and that's part of what's really interesting about the way he's played the last, 4 or 5 games. I mean, he's had a really nice run where he's been in double figures every game. He's attacking. Defensively, he's been good all season, but he's even, I think, more confident and physical on that end of the court now. For Xavier, obviously they needed him to do this to have a chance to make the tournament, so that's big. But also, you're getting later in the season, and he wasn't emerging yet as like a go-to type of scorer on offense, or even like your second type of guy on the offensive end, to where you're getting this interesting spot where you're heading towards the transfer portal opening up. You've got this guy who is very talented, might be an NBA prospect, but if he wasn't going to be a guy who could go out and get you double figures in a game, could you afford to spend what it was going to cost to bring him back for next season? So, like, now that he's emerging like this, it really, one, is probably going to make his price go up a bit in the transfer portal here in a month. But 2, it definitely makes that the decision much bigger for Xavier about whether you're keeping him or not, which I imagine they'd like to now at this point.
There have been times over the last 2 years watching him play and slash the rim. It's like, dude, nobody can stop you from getting there. If you want to do it all the time, you can do it.
Yes.
I get it. I mean, maybe you get a shot blocked in your confidence, but it feels like anytime he wants to get his head down and get to the rim, he's getting to the rim.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen since last year, and certainly this preseason, and why a lot of us were like, hey, Dalen Swain's ready to make the jump. And it just didn't really happen for several months for whatever reason, but it's starting to all of a sudden. He's been fun to watch the last 2+ weeks. Yeah, any other thoughts on any of the local teams, Xavier or any of them, Skinny?
No, it's just this has been such a wild year where, to your point, for a minute it looked like Kentucky was Final Four ready. UC was going to not only get in the tournament and break the streak, but be a good seed. Xavier's not going to get in because of things. NKU's played its way out. Well, now NKU's played you back into some hope. Xavier's played its way back into where we talked about you can almost control your own narrative. Kentucky, some fans are feeling they're going to teeter all the way out of the tournament, which is not going to happen. And UC was dead in the water after West Virginia, and yet maybe they found something. Crazy year.
Yeah, and I wish the teams were all in a little bit better situation.
Yes.
Like the roller coaster has been fun to watch, but I wish all these teams were going to be in the tournament. The fact that, Xavier and Cincinnati both could very realistically not be in and Kentucky be the only local team playing, that would stink. But hopefully we'll have the Norse and the Wildcats and maybe at least one of those other two sneak their way in. All right, let's get into some Ask Skinny Anything. Mostly Super Bowl related questions. We have one that's not. If you could watch the Super Bowl from any location in the stadium, excluding a suite, where would you pick and why?
Anywhere in the stadium. Believe it or not, this is going to sound odd. Like high enough end zone down low. I love the end. I love when we have press boxes in the end zone, and more are going that direction. I don't know why.
22 view.
Yeah, and again, you're up high. In the press box, obviously, I'm up high enough to get the depth perception of it. I don't know why. I love that view. I would take that view, like first row of like a second deck where you're just high enough to get the depth perception, but you're also low enough where you're not looking over people.
I think this is one event where I think being a photographer for a Super Bowl would be unbelievable. Being down on the field, because more than likely,
what a zoo that would be, though, right?
It would be, but more than likely, your team's not playing in it. So you're not as worried about like, oh, I want to be like a fan with the best view in the seats and all that, and I want to cheer and be going crazy. I think it would be cool to capture, like, there's more pageantry for the Super Bowl than anything else. There are more celebrities there. You have a floor ticket to a crazy concert at halftime. I think being a photographer, like being on the field for the Super Bowl, would be pretty awesome.
One of the nicest things I guess I don't know why it's, but back when I worked for a small daily paper in Maysville, Kentucky, I would cover UK home games. Not all of them, because we were such a big prep area, and during that season we had a bunch of high schools we covered. I'd go for some of the bigger games, and I don't know how I pulled this off, but I got a photographer's pass for my best friend. He wasn't a diehard UK fan, but he was a fan, enough of a fan, and he took a camera along. Didn't shoot any shots. He just had the camera. And to this day, he still talks about the cool experience of being on the floor for that Kentucky-Florida game. It was when the late Dwayne Shinsis, I don't even recall that name or not, played for Florida. This was in this was like 87, 88-ish, maybe 89-ish.
I would have been born by that point, yes.
Yeah. So he still talks about that. In fact, I went and stayed with him in Dallas when the Bengals played at the Cowboys, and literally he brought that story up. He goes, "Remember the time?" I do, because I got you the pass. He goes, "That was still awesome." So, yeah, to your point, I mean, I think for people that don't ever get a perspective like that, and especially if it would be a Super Bowl, that would be a pretty cool perspective.
People that are in this field are incredibly jaded, and we totally take that aspect of things for granted.
Yes.
I mean, it is still cool, even just from like a Division I college basketball level, it is still cool to cover a game and be on the inside and get that media perspective. For the people who don't get to do it continuously, it is a cool thing to do one time. It's just, there are other aspects of the job that you grow tired of after a certain point.
So I've always wanted to coach in a state tournament, right, in Rupp.
That'd be fun.
That's literally been something that would be like, if you gave me a bucket list, that's the last thing. But I've been fortunate enough to coach in 2 All-A state tournaments. We just played in it a couple of weeks ago. And I did, man. I soaked that whole thing up. I mean, I'm just sitting around looking and going, we're in Owensboro Sports Center. It was a great atmosphere. We played the home team of all things, so you can imagine what the atmosphere was like. And I literally went, man, how lucky am I to be able to do this? And so, I do take it probably more for granted as a journalist than I do as a coach, because those moments for me are pretty special.
Yeah. Rank these Super Bowl party foods from most essential to least.
Okay.
Wings, pizza, chips and dip, sliders, chili.
Ooh. So my oldest daughter's hosting a bunch of folks because my youngest daughter's in from out of town. She works in Orlando, so she's in. So we're bringing everybody over to her house, and she's gonna serve. So she was giving me part of the menu. She's big on dips. We got an artichoke dip, a spinach dip, and a chili dip, and then
Buffalo chicken?
Buffalo chicken dip. Yeah, buffalo chicken dip.
There's a spinach and an artichoke dip? They're not
Yeah,
like one.
maybe I heard that wrong. Maybe it's just the three. Maybe I know it's artichoke. Maybe it wasn't spinach. Maybe
Well,
just
spinach and artichoke dip is one
yeah,
thing.
yeah, I guess maybe that's what she said.
Yeah.
It's something that I wouldn't eat no matter what.
Yeah, that makes sense that you wouldn't know about that. Okay.
Yeah, no, I'll do the buffalo chicken dip.
Those are pretty good dips.
I've never had chili on Super Bowl Sunday, to be honest with you, but I always love a good bowl of chili. So I'm going to rank that, believe it or not, last because I don't feel it's essential. Wings are a number one for everybody. I mean, come on,
Yep.
it's the perfect party food because actually, it is a meal into itself. So it's not an awful. I mean, I feel awful just gorging myself on chips and dip the whole time. I could do it,
But that's what I do. I chip myself to death every year.
You just feel awful. But at least when you're eating a wing, you're like, okay, this is chicken. This is good. This is decent. All that stuff.
A little protein in you.
I'd say pizza's next to last. I don't find pizza essential on Super Bowl Sunday.
We never have pizza either on the Super Bowl. Now, I'm not against it. I would love pizza for any football game or sporting event, but I'm typically a Super Bowl thing.
Yeah, we're both big pizza guys. I just don't find it. Super Bowl to me is literally totally snack related. I don't find pizza snack. Pizza's a meal. All right, what else do we have? We had sliders on the list.
Sliders were on there, yeah.
I'll put that fourth. That's not an essential for me either. I like a good slider, mind you. I don't find it essential.
No offense to this person, I wouldn't say it's a bad list. It's just not the list I'm used to. It's not. Those aren't the things we have at our Super Bowl.
I know, and like I said, I love a good chili. You give me a good like Tex-Mex chili, I'm down with that. What else do we have?
That was it. It was wings, pizza, chips and dip, sliders, and chili.
Yeah, chips and dip would then be number two. There's nobody that doesn't have a Super Bowl party, doesn't have some, whether it's even just a bag of Ruffles and green onion dip, you're having chips and dip of some kind at a Super Bowl party.
Yeah, chips and dip would be number one for me. Wings is almost always there.
Skyline dip.
Like pigs in a blanket or a hanky-panky.
We do mozzarella sticks at home. I don't think my daughter's got that on the menu.
I'm not a mozzarella stick guy, but that's a very popular one at our parties typically too. So yeah, those are the types of things, like you said, snack foods. Would you rather? This is kind of what you were just talking about. Coach the winning team in a Super Bowl, be the quarterback who throws the game-winning pass in a Super Bowl, or be the receiver who catches the game-winning touchdown.
Good. Because it sounds. I'd like to be the coach. I know that sounds odd because I can't fancy myself ever being a quarterback or receiver in the Super Bowl. For goodness, I could fancy myself being a coach, and I'm probably not a football coach, but I got more coach blood than player blood in me, so I'm going to go coach.
Yeah, I think you just in this situation. I think I just say quarterback because being a Super Bowl level quarterback would be the best life out of all of those options.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, you're making more than the head coach financially. I mean, all those things, all the perks that come with it. You get a
supermodel,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I would not for this moment maybe, but just in general because this is a hard choice. I think I'd choose quarterback. What? Oh, is Skinny excited for Kendrick Lamar? And what is his favorite halftime show ever?
My favorite halftime show ever, my kids tune this out, but this is my era of music, was the Rolling Stones. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me. I get it that it's always generational, and no, I'm not excited for Kendrick Lamar. I probably won't watch. That's probably the time I'll go do something else for 20 minutes and then come back. I'm not a big Super Bowl halftime show guy. I'm not. I'm sure that shocks you.
But you do like the commercials, which is...
I love the commercials.
Yeah,
I love the commercials. I just the Super Bowl halftime show actually last year or no. When was the Dr. Dre one?
That was the year the Bengals were in it.
Yeah, I actually watched that.
Because McPherson went out and watched it, and it derailed his entire career.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Darren Simmons still.
I like that. That was a good one.
Yeah, I agree with that. That was a great one. But I'm with you. For the most part, they don't do a lot for me, typically. Yeah. Now, I feel like they've had pretty good names the last several years. I've enjoyed the names, but I don't really care that much about the performance.
Is there a prop bet out there for set list or first song?
Oh yeah, I'm sure there is. Yeah,
that feels like you manipulate that quite easily.
Oh yeah, always. That's what I always say about this. It's like, what are they doing from keeping his friends or family from betting on
Yes.
that?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
but I guess if anyone places like a $15,000 bet on the
Yeah,
first
it
song
would
of
it
the
would
Super
go
Bowl
ding, ding, ding,
halftime
ding,
show,
ding, red flags, yeah.
yeah. All right, this is not Super Bowl related, but it is our last question. What does Skinny like to watch other than sports, and what are his favorite all-time sitcoms?
Oh, I'm classic like Seinfeld. I loved Wings. You probably don't remember the show Wings from back in the 90s. I loved Wings.
I didn't watch it, but I know what it is.
Yeah, I liked Wings a lot. Cheers, that genre of show. But honestly, if I'm not watching a sporting event, and I'm so busy in basketball season, and then in Bengals season, and in the summertime I like to sit outside, so I'm usually listening to the Reds game or whatever. I can binge. I can still binge Law and Orders, especially old school Law and Orders. I like Blue Bloods, not as much as my buddy Tom Gamble does. I don't know. I used to love that show, and then I don't know why I just kind of tuned away from it. I still like it, but I can binge watch every Law and Order that's come along, every iteration of Law and Order that's come along. Not a big, I'm not a big binge watch show guy. My wife and I are watching because we both have a hard time finding common ground in shows to watch. Shocking, I'm sure. I mean, she
Yeah.
likes to watch some sports too. I mean, she's a UK fan and she'll watch Bengals and UK and all that stuff. But we watch American Housewife, which ran from like 2015 to 21. I find that show fun. I'm trying to start a show, and it's a hot show. One of my assistant coaching friends at Beechwood has turned me on, and a couple players watched it. Peaky Blinders. Do you know if
Oh
Peaky?
yeah.
Have you watched it?
Oh yeah.
Have
That
you watched?
I watched the first like 3 or 4 seasons, I want to say. I can't remember
Okay.
how many there are, but I fell off at a certain point because I was waiting for the new season to come out and then I never got back into it when it did. But that is right up your alley.
I know it is, and I'm trust me. I'm trying to talk her. I've told her the premise. I've told her all that stuff. I said, I think you get. So just we tried to give the Bear a chance, and after one episode, it was too much for me. I know people who love the Bear love it. I might be willing to go back to it because of all the things they've told me that evolved. Because they're like, yeah, it was slow for me to get into, but once you got into it, it was really good. But I got to watch Peaky Blinders. Too many people have told me too many good things about it, and it does sound right up my alley.
I'm an open-minded person. I really am. Like I like a lot of different things, especially when it comes to television shows, but I am very good at seeing how other people react to something and then realizing if it's for me or not. And The Bear is a perfect example of one of those shows. Like I know I will not like The Bear just based on how other people react to
Did you
it.
try? Did you try even an episode of it?
No, it's the same thing as the soccer show that I didn't watch that
Oh,
everyone
Ted
loves.
Lasso, I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
That was one that we could watch together, so I enjoyed that for that. But I also enjoyed the show. I didn't think I'd like it either, Rick. It was funny. Like the first couple, I'm like, eh, and then as it went on, I'm like, I literally when the new episode would come out, we must watch. The other one we were waiting for the next season of it. The Righteous Gemstones might rank as one of my favorite shows of all time. It was so dysfunctional that it was freaking awesome, and I need another season of. They've been talking about doing another season or a spinoff. I'm waiting for it.
I remember you saying that on this podcast maybe last year or a year before that when someone asked you
Yes.
what your favorite show was at the time and you said Righteous Gemstones. So
So just such a zany show that and the acting in it is just superb. It's really good.
all right, that's all we got.
All right, good stuff. Appreciate it very much. We'll have more silly season NFL news to talk about, I'm sure, this time next week. We'll have a Super Bowl champion and another wacky week of college basketball will be behind us. We'll discuss all of that on next week's podcast. For Rick Broering, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition, presented by Blake, the Attorney Maisley.